Discover 3. More chilling, true stories from the depths of night. Have you ever woken to a sound that makes your skin go cold? The kind of noise you convince yourself has a harmless explanation until it doesn't? These 3 accounts are from people who lived those moments, the kinds of late-night encounters that rearrange what safe means. I'm passing them on exactly as they were told to me. First person, unvarnished, still vibrating with the shock of what happened. If you like real late-night horror, hit like and subscribe. I'll share more stories like these. My name is Patrick McCabe, and this happened when I was 21, right after I had my wisdom teeth taken out. I'd been told to expect some swelling, some soreness, and to take my pain meds every 3 hours. The problem was I couldn't keep myself asleep for more than those 3-hour chunks. I'd wake half asleep, dizzy, the room flat and close, the window open because it was a stupidly hot night in July and my parents' house had no real air conditioning. The fan couldn't do much. Heat makes everything sharper for me, the hum of the fan, the rustle of leaves, the thud of my own heartbeat. I remember the scratching first. It was faint at first, like a gutter mouse or something brushing shingles, and for a second I thought it was nothing. Then it kept going, tentative and then more urgent. It sounded like nails across the roof, a slow, deliberate skittering right above my window. I was groggy enough to think it was a dream. I sat up, the bed leaning with the weight of my limbs, the dull light from the hallway spilling in. My face felt raw where the anesthesia still had its aftertaste in my mouth. I got up to look. I had a heavy flashlight, one of those old metal ones, because my dad likes to keep things that look serious in the house. I stepped onto the back porch and squinted up at the roofline, the beam cutting across the shingles. At first, I saw nothing, then movement. A silhouette shifting near the ridge, hunched slightly, hair or skin catching the moonlight. There was a figure there, standing up like they were comfortable on the slope of the roof. I remember thinking how wrong it all was. How did somebody even get up there? The house had gutters and a tree a few feet away, but nothing that made it obvious. I knocked on the window that connected my bedroom to the porch, the light clacking like a dry, sudden punctuation. The silhouette froze. My heart climbed into my throat. I called out, "Hey, who's up there?" My voice came out thin. No answer. The person stayed as if listening to me, then moved toward the eaves and looked down over the edge, right where I had been standing on the porch. For a split second I could see them, pale in the flashlight beam, naked, rain or sweat making their skin gleam, not clothed, not hiding. Their face was an empty, urgent mask, and their eyes caught mine for that terrible instant. I have never been so sure that someone could see straight through me. Then they jumped. It wasn't a slow climb down the gutter. 1 second the feet were on the shingles, the next they were airborne, colliding with me. I tried to brace, but the momentum was too much. They launched down, tackled me off the porch steps and onto the ground. I hit my head on gravel. There was a bright burning pain and a metallic taste, and then hands on my face. He ripped at my cheeks and hair, clawing like an animal. I couldn't tell if he was trying to blind me or just tearing at anything he could reach. I screamed. The flashlight skidded away. My dad came barreling out of the back door. He'd heard my scream, and he shouted, and then there were 2 of them grappling on the grass. The man got up and bolted toward the trees lining the yard. He disappeared into the dark like he had been swallowed. My dad tried to chase, but the thing about woods at night is they become a swallowing chest. No footprints, no trail that's clear enough to follow with the speed we needed. I ended up in the hospital. I had cuts and scratches across my face that the ER cleaned and closed. They asked me about the man. I described him as best I could. I told them he'd been on my roof. They took photos, but they didn't find armor or a ladder or anything that explained how he'd been up there. The police came. They walked the perimeter, looked into the trees, shone their beams into every dark hole. They told me they'd search more at first light, but when morning came, the tracks were gone. The woods had covered everything with leaves and shadow. They suggested a few possible explanations. An escapee from somewhere, Someone in the neighborhood who'd been drinking, but none of those fit with what I had seen. I only knew the figure had been on my roof, had jumped, had been naked and deliberate. My mother installed a motion sensor and increased the locks. She also stayed up on the couch for a while, hems of her robe wrapped tight, jittery as any parent with a child in the hospital. My father kept the porch light on for weeks. We pulled the curtains shut every night. I started sleeping with a baseball bat because rationality gives way in those late hours. You do what you can hold and hope it's enough. The police said they'd patrol the area more, but they never found traces. They told me to call if I saw him again. The most terrifying part was that phrase. It sounded perfunctory over the phone, like a checkbox. Call if you see him again. The implication was a sharp thing. Don't expect them to be there to stop it. I think the sleep deprivation made everything worse. Those 3-hour cycles left me in a state where my brain would not fully process fear, so it would either magnify tiny noises into monstrous explanations or dull the signal until my fight or flight was sluggish. Even once the physical wounds healed, I kept waking at 3 in the morning, convinced I heard shingles shift. Sometimes I would sit up and stare at the ceiling for an hour, bat in my lap, the flashlight by my hand, like a relic from some war. I couldn't tell if the fear had altered how I heard things permanently, or if the sounds were still normal, and I had simply changed. I never saw him again. We live with that loose end, and that's perhaps worse. Not knowing whether he was random or had seen us before is an ache that stays. I can only guess. Maybe someone was living rough in the woods, maybe not. But it's pure conjecture. What I do know is how it felt when something that shouldn't have been in my yard landed on me and then vanished. If I close my eyes, I can still see the flash of skin and the way the moonlight turned him into a silhouette on the shingles. That was Patrick McCabe. This next story was told to me by a friend who lived in a house with a weird layout and whose girlfriend Anna was with him the night it happened. The house itself was weird in an unsettling way. The hallway ran in an unexpected line through the middle, like someone had added on rooms without any real plan. Because of that layout, there was a long corridor that connected the front door area to the back, and windows that faced inward where you wouldn't expect them. On the night in question, his parents were out of town, and he and Anna were home alone. They were the kind of couple that dozed early, but Anna fell asleep on the couch, and the narrator went to bed in his room, the TV still humming in the other room. At around 2 in the morning, he woke to the clatter of the trash can outside. He threw on jeans and went to check it out, only to find the can overturned and garbage scattered in the driveway. He bent to pick things up, more annoyed than afraid at first. A raccoon could have done it, he told himself. He shoved everything back in, put the can upright, and thought that would be the end of it. He put the porch light on and checked the locks. All normal. A couple of hours later, after he'd fallen back asleep, something else woke him. This time it was tapping, soft, then persistent, against the window that looked out over the side yard. The tapping had a rhythm that didn't belong to the house. He padded over, barefoot, and peered out. For a moment he saw nothing. The yard was a black smear. Then, as his eyes adjusted, something moved close to the glass on the other side of the pane. He remembers the hair on his arms rising. It was a face pressed to the window, the features too close, as if whoever it was wanted to be seen but not to be heard. He could see the press of breath fogging the pane slightly, the outline of a nose, the white of an eye, the way the hair matted to whatever scalp it was. It was hard to describe. There was something bristly about the skin, like dry leaves or grit, not a clean face. Part of him wanted to run, but another part was frozen with the need to know who it was. He screamed, and Anna woke. She saw the outline and screamed too. They both scrambled to the door, adrenaline turning their movements jerky. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher asked the usual questions, whether there was anyone inside, whether doors were locked, whether they felt in danger. They told them to stay put and that officers were on their way. When the police arrived, they checked the perimeter. There was no sign of any tool marks on the windows, no footprints that made sense in the yard. The glass had no scratches, no evidence that someone had tried to force it. The officers were polite and thorough, but there was nothing to take back to the station as evidence of forced entry. The couple showed them the security light and the overturned trash can from earlier, but the officers couldn't link the two. They offered suggestions, maybe a vagrant, maybe a prank, maybe someone who ran from the street and pressed their face to the window, but each idea was tentative. The police can only do so much when there are no traces, and that refusal to conclude was its own kind of terror. After that night, the little sounds of the house that had been innocuous before, pipes settling, the neighbor's dog, became threats. Every time the trash truck rumbled past in the morning, he would flinch. Anna insisted on sleeping with the curtains fully closed, and they installed motion-activated lights on the side yard. They also bought a cheap camera and set it up to aim at the window. For a while, they reviewed footage every morning. Most nights, it showed nothing but darkness. Once in a blue moon, the camera caught the shadow of a person moving in the far yard, too grainy to make out a face. Most nights were blank, emphasizing the one night when something had been inches from their glass. There's a particular brutality to that kind of encounter because there's no physical injury, at least none that the state recognizes as a crime scene. You come away with your nerves shredded, but with nothing the police can use. People around them suggested it could have been a homeless person with nowhere else to go, or a drunk teenager looking for a scare. Perhaps. It remains speculation. The couple never found out who it was. The not knowing pushed them to add cameras and stronger curtains, to sleep with lights on sometimes, to install sensors that would alert them if a body came near the window. They reported on the police's response as procedural, civil, efficient, but limited by the evidence they could gather. The thing that stayed with them was the intimacy of it. Someone had been close enough to watch them breathe in their living room. The violation of that proximity lingered. Anna started waking up to sudden jolts of panic, convinced she felt someone at the window. They moved a while later, citing the creeping unease that pushed them into leaving the house. Even months afterward, they found themselves checking windows in other houses, seeing faces in the glass where there were none, listening for tapping that didn't happen. That was their story. The third comes from a single man in his mid-30s who worked nights and was used to small, strange noises. He'd been living alone for years, comfortable with the solitude that comes when the world is otherwise occupied. He liked the quiet, the sound of fridge motors, the occasional car passing on the street. On a typical night, he'd been at his desk, dozing now and then, finishing work as usual. The clock clicked toward 3 in the morning. At exactly 3, his bedroom door was hammered with a force that felt like a battering ram. 3 heavy, repeated bangs, the kind of sound that freezes everything mid-beat. He sat bolt upright, the hair on his arms up, heart pounding like a fist against his ribs. He leaped out of bed, grabbed the first thing he could find, an iron skillet, and crept toward the door. Even in the dark, he could tell the sound had come from outside. The doorknob was still locked. Through the peephole, he saw nothing but a sliver of shadow. He called out, "Who is it?" No answer. The pounding started again, lower now but louder, like someone trying to scare him into opening up. He went through the house. Kitchen, living room, doors all locked, windows bolted. There were footprints in the dust outside that matched a heavy pace, like someone had been pacing the front porch and then had thrown a shoulder into the door. When he opened the door wide enough to look outside, he saw only a dark street and a trash bin, undisturbed. No one on the sidewalk, nothing on the surveillance camera that faced the curb. He felt ridiculous and terrified at the same time. Who bangs on a door that way and then just leaves? He called the police. They came, checked out the perimeter, asked if he had offended anyone recently, if he had arguments with neighbors. Their questions were careful, because the most cruel thing about a night like that is it robs you of the certainty that someone was there with malice rather than a prankster or an animal. They looked for fingerprints, for marks on the door, for any sign that the pounding had been more than a show of force. The officers promised to patrol the area. A week later, nothing turned up. No arrests, no obvious motive. He reported feeling watched for days after, something in his chest tightening every time there was a knock, however friendly. He tried to rationalize it. He told himself maybe it had been teenagers looking for a reaction. Maybe it had been a delivery driver who was too impatient. Maybe it had been a person suffering something else entirely, lost and banging for help. He allowed himself those options because he needed to. But the size of the bangs and the way they seemed targeted at 3 a.m., as if the timing were deliberate, didn't fit with a simple mistake. He considered whether he should have opened the door and spoken with whoever was there. The police told him not to. He learned the conflicting pulls of curiosity and self-preservation in a very immediate way. For a week after that night, he barely slept. He would keep the lights on and sit up reading something trivial just to keep the world bright. Every time he heard a car pull up, he would go to the window and watch. He told friends and family about it, and they tried to reassure him, but that reassurance often felt thin and distant. At work, he found himself distracted, unable to focus, replaying the sound of knuckles against wood. In private, he imagined scenarios where he'd opened the door and been met with a face that made sense, where he could file a police report and feel resolution. None of those things happened. The pounding stood alone, an unresolved breach. After that week stretched into a month, he started sleeping better, not because he had forgotten, but because exhaustion filled the space where fear had sat. The memory remained, though, and every so often he would wake in the small hours with a start that felt like the door itself had been slammed. He told me he'd changed the locks, installed a deadbolt, and put in a better peephole. He'd never had anyone in his house who did anything more than knock politely. The sudden, aggressive banging had forced him to rethink what solitude meant. The house he had felt safe in by himself turned into a place that could be violated with a single, loud series of hits. Across these 3 stories, there are threads that loop and knot. The way heat and medication and sleeplessness make us more vulnerable, the sudden sharpness of sound in the dark, the hollow feeling that follows when the police can't find answers. None of the narrators got a neat resolution. None of them could point to a motive or a face that authorities could chase down with certainty. What they were left with were practical changes, motion lights, cameras, new locks, and with a more intangible aftermath, a rewiring of how they hear the night. It's strange what stays with you. For Patrick, the flash of skin on the shingles and the way his father's voice cut through the dark are imprinted like film frames. For the couple with Anna, it's the image of a face against glass and the slow erosion of the feeling that their living room was private. For the single man, it's the rhythm of knuckles on wood that still makes his chest rise. Those images are not violent in a descriptive sense. They're violent in how they remove the comfort that our homes provide. Night robs the edges off our certainties. One detail kept coming up for each of them. The police did what they could under the rules of evidence, but their hands were tied when there was no physical trace to follow. That procedural limit was experienced as practical and as heartbreaking. It's important to say clearly, the authorities did not dismiss them rudely. The officers listened and made notes. They patrolled and offered suggestions. But when a roof yields no ladder, a window shows no scratch, and a door bears no definitive print, the case becomes one of probabilities rather than facts. It's a maddening place to be on the receiving end of a frightening event, facing the emotional aftermath without the reassurance of a formal resolution. People often ask what I would do if I were in the same situation. I won't offer a manual or instructions. Those are pointless and potentially dangerous. What I can say is this: each person reacted in ways that made them feel safer afterwards, and part of recovering was taking control of the things they could change. They documented what happened. They installed preventive measures. They talked about it with people who would believe them. They changed routines. None of that erased the nights, but it provided some solidity in the daylight. The physical changes, lights, cameras, locks, were tangible responses. The emotional work, time, therapy for some, conversations, the slow reclaiming of sleep was quieter and longer. If you've ever been through something like this, you know how complicated it is to explain to someone who hasn't. It's not only the fear of future incidents, but the recalibration of trust in the ordinary noises of the house. The house is meant to be a place where the sounds mean nothing. When they do, you notice them, catalogue them, and sometimes you can give them safe labels again. Other times, the labels never come back. You keep the bat by the bed. You check the cameras at 3 a.m. And you live with the knowledge that safety is layered and never absolute. There's also another layer to all of this that I want to leave you with. Not every night has an obvious villain. Sometimes the threat is simply the night itself, the shrinking of options, the dampening of witnesses, the way darkness makes us small. That's not a comfort. It's simply a truth that ties these stories together. They are true largely because of that truth. The world becomes less forgiving when the sun goes down, and the people who get caught in those thin hours come out altered by the experience. If any of these stories hit too close to home, tell us about it down below. Share your experience. What time did it happen? What did you hear? How did you change things afterward? If you want more true night stories like these, subscribe and hit the bell. I'll keep sharing accounts from people who have lived in the places where darkness and danger meet. For now, keep your doors locked, and remember that sometimes the most chilling thing is not what you saw, but what you were left not knowing.